Okay, so now we're starting part 3 of this very long chapter. It's going to involve, by the end of it, cranial nerves. We're going to do the deep brain area. So we're going to look in here in the diencephalon and the brain stem, and then also the cranial nerves that come off of there. All right, first of all, the brain stem. If you remember from the last one, this here is the corpus callosum that you have right here, and that connects the left and the right hemisphere so that they can communicate, with each other as far as processing information in there. As we go down below that, you're going to see portions of the brain. This right here, we talked about, this is the thalamus. This little triangle looking section right in here is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus controls the actions of the pituitary. So this pituitary right here, remember that's called the infundibulum. All those little names in there. But what we're going to start with, since we talked about those already, is this section sort of in here. So this through here, okay? And that part is called the brainstem. It is made up of 3 things. The first part is the midbrain, and then you have this elongated, and you notice that it swells out, it bulges out here, and then it bulges out here, pons, and then the last part is the medulla oblongata. Anything below that is spinal cord. So it's this section that's kind of in here. And then we have these other specific little characteristics that go along with this that we're going to come back and talk about, like corpora quadrigemina, pineal gland right there that secretes melatonin. Okay. Cerebral aqueducts and the reticular formation is all going to be part of this brainstem portion. All right, so the midbrain first, since that's closest to the interior of the brain. So here's the diencephalon in this region right in here, right? And so it's between the diencephalon and what we call the pons. So it's just this sort of region in here. Notice there's not a big difference in those 3, except that this, it's like the first bulge. So you come down here, here's the thalamus, it's right posterior to that, or inferior, I guess, to that would be a better term. It does have fibers that are going to join the lower portions of this to the upper portions. So once again, a lot of what's going on in here, they have their own jobs in their own right, but a lot of what they do is kind of direct activity. So as information comes up from the spinal cord, these things sort of connect to the brain itself and then direct where does this stuff need to go. All right. Cerebral aqueduct, remember we had the ventricles. You had the left and the right ventricle. You had the third ventricle, which is up in here. And then you've got connected to that, this little canal-looking thing, canal right here, that is the cerebral aqueduct. So with the CSF, the cerebral spinal fluid flows through there, and then it joins in with this little portion that's going to protrude out into the cerebellum. So you have cerebellum out in this region right here. And that's the 4th ventricle right there. So cerebral aqueduct is between the 3rd and the 4th ventricles. Okay. We also have something called the cerebral peduncles, and basically it's just a bundle of nerve fibers which have their own jobs in there. And importantly, the corpora quadrigemina. Quad means 4. And when you look at the corpora quadrigemina, what you can see, and you can kind of see it in this picture too, a little bit, but it's really like, here's 2 sections right here, and then there's 2 more mirror image to it. So it's 4 little sections, and that's where it gets its name from. And corpora just means body. Here you're going to have center for reflexes. So remember I told you a lot of what's going on in this portion of the brain is like primal instincts and things for maintaining life. So again, reflexes would be part of this, but specifically the corpora quadrigemina is for auditory and visual reflexes. Jumping back, that kind of stuff. Not the head motion, but the visual reflex itself, like dilations. All right, pons. Next down from that. So the pons would be this next section down in there. If you go back to this picture from the side, it's this sort of elongated bulge that comes out here. The pons itself is, in between, it's in the brainstem, it's in between the medulla oblongata and that midbrain in there, but its job is to help regulate breathing. So the rate and the depth of the breathing. So when you are low on oxygen, you're going to start breathing heavier. You're going to start getting more depth in that breathing to bring in more oxygen. So it's kind of that job that says, hey, we're low on oxygen or we've got too much carbon dioxide. It's really time to change that breathing rate. And it modifies that so that you have plenty of oxygen to go around to your cells. Again, all of these sections from medulla oblongata to pons to midbrain, all of them are also that in between relay station. So another job that it has is to take those nerve impulses coming up from the spinal cord and the medulla oblongata and then direct them out towards places that they need to go to. So from the medulla oblongata and the cerebellum, move those along to the right places. The medulla oblongata is the last section on there, and you can see it right in here. So it is oblong. It's longer in shape, but it is the last step from the brain to the spinal cord. So it continues down into the spinal cord. Anything beneath that is spinal cord for that. So it's like the first step of the brain, the last part of the spinal cord. It's going to take your ascending messages, so any of the sensory messages coming in, and descending any of the motor messages going out, and conducts them between the brain and the spinal cord. And once again, in its own right, it has its other jobs too. None of these things are just strictly sort of relay stations, so that's a really important job. The medulla oblongata is also responsible for control centers for your heart, so cardiac, vasomotor. So this is like this is your vasculatory system, and when it says motor, it's talking about the movement there. So like the dilation of the blood vessels and that kind of stuff, moving the blood through there. Respiratory centers also. So these vital types of actions. So things again that are vital to life and that you really don't have conscious control over. So they're the involuntary actions in there, and it controls that. It's also a center for the non-vital reflexes. Just like you said, pons was part of that reflex for the auditory and stuff. This is a reflex center too, but for things like coughing, sneezing, swallowing, and vomiting. Reticular formation is this. They've got it in gold here. When you look at it on like the brain itself, it's not visible. You're not going to see it in there. They've got it colored in gold, but it's just this section back here of nerve fibers that are have a specific function. It's just not as obvious as they make it in the drawings. But basically, what its job is, it's on the next page. Hold on a second. All right, it does connect. So again, relay station and connecting. So we're going to connect the hypothalamus right here, hypothalamus, the basal nuclei, which are down in here too, the cerebellum, which isn't drawn on here, but that's right about there, and then the cerebrum also. So it's another one of these relay stations. But what you really need to kind of remember about the reticular formation is its job with this right here. Again, secondary filtering sensory information, sending it to the right place. But the reticular formation is one of those things that is regulates our transition state. So your transition state from sleep to wake, wake to sleep. So as you go to relaxing in the evening and getting ready for sleep, your reticular formations activities depress a little bit, and that allows you to start slowing down for those sleep type activities. And then in the morning, as you wake up, it's going to transition to a more wakeful state. So it becomes more aroused in the morning. So it's starting to wake the brain back up. It's not like you go completely, your brain never stops functioning, but it does go into those different states. Types of sleep, since we're talking about sleep, we have the first type is what we call slow wave sleep. This is what we refer to as non-REM. REM is your dreaming sort of sleep. So in slow wave sleep, we're not in that REM sleep. You're tired. Your reticular system is decreasing in activity, so it's depressing a little bit. You're getting to that sleepy state. Okay, you are restful. You can fall into that sleep, but it's not the dreaming sleep, it's dreamless sleep. So it's kind of this restful stuff. And then your body's going to start reacting to that too. So if I'm going from a wakeful time to a sleep time, my blood rates and pressure is going to go down. The movement of the blood through the system goes down. It never stops completely, but it does depress a little bit because you don't need to work it as much. Same with the respiratory rate. So you're going to slow that respiratory rate down. And then you can have this range in there from this light sleep to heavy sleep. But again, remember, it's this dreamless non-REM sleep in there. You alternate throughout the night. So it's not like you start, I'm awake and then I start to fall asleep, right? And then I wake back up again. You don't really just go into a slow wave here, and then deep sleep. You go back and forth all night long. So you're alternating between this REM sleep and this slow wave sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement. And when somebody's in REM, you can see that because even with their eyes closed, they're flickering and their eyelids are flickering back and forth. This is when your brain's really active. The eye activity lets you know that this is actually high active brain. And what you're doing in this time is you're processing information from the day. Okay, so if you want to really learn something, by the way, like I want to study for a test or I want to learn and remember something, this REM sleep is really, really important for you because this is the time period when you process all that information and it becomes part of that memory. If you never get into a REM sleep, you really have a difficult time actually making a memory of something in there. So it's a really important part of our processing of the day's activities. It's also where you're going to see dreams. And dreams are really that processing experience. So what you're doing is you're shooting like a bunch of pictures of the day through your brain, and then your brain weaves it into a storyline. And sometimes that storyline's really kind of crazy because those pictures don't really go together in any way. So you have this storyline in between it, and that's your dreams in there. But your heart rate is, where in slow wave, your heart rate and everything depressed, it's really pretty irregular at this point. So you've got this irregular, much more activity going on in the brain during this time period. And remember, it's going to go REM, slow wave, back and forth. All right, cerebellum. The cerebellum is this lower portion right here, separate from the cerebrum, separate from the brainstem. It is its own little separate thing, and it like the cerebrum, it does have the two hemispheres. So you do have the left and the right hemisphere, like you would in the cerebrum. So it's divided into the two. It is behind, posterior to all of this, medulla oblongata and this pons in here. And it has a very distinct texture where you have with the brain, the cerebrum portion of the brain, you have all of these gyri and these sulci and everything that are going on in here. With this, you have, notice that they draw it in even with the texture. They have this texture in here. When you cut it in half, the interior doesn't look anything like this. It has this very beautiful branch looking pattern of the white matter surrounded by gray matter. That branching pattern is what we call the arbor vitae. So arbor stands for tree, vita, or vitae with the E on the end, plural, stands for tree of life. So it's the tree of life. And it kind of tells you how important the cerebellum is. Where the cerebrum is all about thought and processing and visual, images and putting everything together. The cerebellum isn't about that, but it still has an extreme important function to your body. All right, there's the white arbor vitae, and then the cortex. Just like you have a cerebral cortex, you have a cerebellar cortex too, and that's just the gray matter that surrounds that arbor vitae. All right, you have cerebellar peduncles. Okay, these are just little nerve tracts that run and communicate information in there. Same with that little dentate nucleus in there. The job of the cerebellum is manyfold, but some of the important jobs here. Take in your sensory information that you need to process. Not so much like I'm exploring the world and I touch something. This is more about the positioning of my body. So you got to think, okay, so if I've got my arm in this position right here, let's do it sideways, and I want to move it to another position. You really don't consciously think about the position that your arm was in versus with a position you want to move it to, but you have to constantly have inventory of where are my body parts, how are they in relationship to each other, so that when I move, I can make these smooth motions. That allows you to coordinate your muscular activity. So the cerebellum is all about coordination, okay? So to do that coordination, it has to really figure out where my body parts are at all times. So you have these little sensors in your muscles and your tendons and different, and we'll come back and talk about those muscles and tendons and stuff that send information to the brain at all time and say, hey, my arm is at, this 45-degree angle, or my legs are straight, or whatever position those muscles are in, how much tension is on those muscles and those tendons, so that when I go to make a movement, I really have an idea of where my body is, where those body parts are, and I can move and make adjustments to that. Okay. Along with that, we're going to see posture as part of that too. So, how are we sitting? How are we standing is all coordinated with that cerebellum. Here's your study guide there, your little section that says, hey, this is what I need to know in short form. So you can come back and look at that. All right, brain waves. We all talk about brain waves. We know about brain waves and measuring them. The brain, after all, and any of the nervous system is really just electrical signals. So if it's electrical signals, then we can detect that change in electrical fluctuations as they go through the nerves and then the neurons in the brain too. So what they do is they place these little electrodes around in different places on the head, okay, and then measure how much activity is going on in there. We call this an EEG, electroencephalogram, okay. Basically, it's just saying how much electrical activity is there in one place and what's going on in that, and during different parts of your body and different things that you're using in there. We can use it to look at what is the pattern of sleep on your brain in different areas versus the pattern of wakefulness or high concentration. But you can also look at, if we know what the norm is by doing these things, if we know what the norm is, then you can figure out what the abnormal type of electrical signals are. So you can use it to detect seizures, right? If something's not going right, so a tumor, we use them for brain death too. So when the person has, in a coma or had some sort of tragic accident and they're not showing much life signs, we can say, hey, there's really no activity in the brain. If it's not sending out any electrical signals, there's no activity, and that would be brain death. All right, there's 4 types of brain waves, and you can see them here in the little graph that I'm showing you. When you look at this graph, you have what's called peaks. That's the top, and then you have the valleys, okay? And so really what we do is we measure between those peaks, or you can measure between the valleys because it's the exact same thing, right? But the distance between those peaks basically gives you a rate, all right? So in 1 second, if you look down here at the delta waves, we got peak here, major peak, and then another one here. And so we have a lot more spread between those with some minor in between. Versus, look at the beta waves. You got a peak here and a peak here, so there's a lot less time between those 2 peaks. And so that kind of gives you an idea of how active those waves are, and that allows us to classify them. So the first group is called alpha. Alpha waves are normally found in the posterior regions of the head. They have what I was talking about, the difference, the peaks between the peaks. You have about 8 to 13 cycles per second. That means per second you're going, up and down, right? We usually see this when you're awake, but you're not in high activity. So we're awake but are resting. So your eyes are closed, you're kind of calm, and you're not doing a lot of heavy activity, okay? But you're not asleep, all right? Beta waves in blue down here, these are more than 13 cycles per second. Look how close they are. I mean, and the peaks come really close together. So these are really the fast ones. These are usually found in the anterior, so front portion of the head, anterior portion of the head. And this is usually seen when you're really engaged in mental activity attention. You've got a lot of thought, and you got to think about it. It's showing there's a lot of activity, a lot of little peaks in there. So it's a lot of cycles per second. So this is the highest rate and shows the most activity. Then we have theta and delta. Theta waves in gray. Theta waves are about 4 to 7 cycles per second, so they're close, but they're not nearly as close as theta. These are found normally in the parietal and temporal regions of the brain. We see them in children, not so much in adults, but periodically. But mostly it's seen in children. Okay, when you do see it in adults, that's kind of like during those times when you're falling to sleep. So going in those early stages of sleep, sometimes during emotional stress or something like that. But it's not this most common. And then the last type is delta. Delta are very slow. You can see that, less than 4 cycles per second there. And this is when your brain and your body and all of your activities are very relaxed. So it's during sleep. And this is seen throughout the cerebral cortex. So this is the big one with sleep, okay? Like I said, sometimes you've got theta during sleep, but really for adults, we're looking at delta for during that sleep time. All right, so linking our body and our organs and, the exterior and, like light waves coming in and all that kind of stuff to the brain is going to be, this conduit of going to the spinal cord up through the brain and from the brain back down again. So we have to have nerves that do that. So that's all part of the peripheral nervous system. And we've got 2 main categories for that. Those that come directly off the brain themselves, so they're not linked to the spinal cord. They come straight from the brain and they feed into places like the face, and then they also can feed back. So they can be sensory coming out, going into the brain, or they can be motor coming back out. Usually most of the cranial nerves are going to be in the face region, but we do have them that go down into the neck, and we've got one cranial nerve that really goes all the way down into the thoracic and abdominal cavities. Spinal nerves come off the spine. So they're coming, from this point here, the neck, the base of the brain, and then all the way down. And those are the pairs of nerves that come straight off of that, arising from the spinal cord. So they're feeding into the body. And again, they're going to have information that's going out towards things like the skin and the skeletal system and telling it to do so, motor. But they were also sensory coming in from skin and skeletal. And then we also have the autonomic versions of those that go to the viscera. We're going to start with cranial, and then we'll come back to spinal. All right, there's your breakdown, subdivisions again. All right, looking at a peripheral nerve. So there's our brain, here's our spinal cord, here's one of the nerves coming off. This looks a lot like what you saw with the muscles. It's a bundle. Remember how we had the muscles and they were smaller and smaller and smaller sections? You got the same thing going on in here, even the same name. So I have a bundle of nerves within a big bundle, and that's called a fascicle. So that sort of thing's the name. Even terms like epi and peri and stuff like this. So we have epi, but instead of mycium, which meant muscle, my means muscle, this has neur in the word. So epineurium, surrounding the outside. You have the perineurium, which surrounds one fascicle, and then the endoneurium, which is one little section going around here, smaller and smaller. And don't forget, these Schwann cells that produce the myelin and the nodes of Ranvier that are really important in conducting the nerve impulses and making them fast. All right, let's classify these guys. Sensory first. So this means we're coming from outside of the central nervous system going into the central nervous system. So into the brain and spinal cord. We have names for these. And then we're going to come back to them. Motor nerves go from the central nervous system back out to muscles or glands and tell things to respond. This isn't anything new. You've learned this before, okay? Now let's start talking about combining these things. A mixed nerve has both sensory and motor function. So it's not just isolated to being only a sensory function and bringing information in, or a motor function bringing stuff out. It actually has some functions of both. Okay, so we do have some nerves that are just sensory, some nerves that are just motor, and then you have some that are all, both of those together. So it's called a mixed nerve. So there's really 3 classifications going on in here. Okay. Most of your nerves, especially those coming off the spinal cord, are really mixed nerves. So to have them isolated into being just sensory or just motor is not the norm. It's really much more the norm to have them have both sensory and motor functions to that. And in fact, you can just go ahead and say all the spinal nerves are mixed, because there's only one exception there, and that's the first pair. So when you think spinal nerves, think mixed. Cranial, on the other hand, are going to be a different story, and I'll give you a way to remember which ones are sensory, which ones are motor, and which ones are mixed. All right, classification of our fibers. Big long terms, and then short terms, GSE. But if you break the terms down, you're going to know what it means. General just means we're not specialized in any way. So it's not like eyes and nose that have specialized functions. This is goes generally to the body, okay? And then you know these terms like somatic and autonomic. Somatic goes to like muscles and glands and stuff. And then third word on there, efferent versus afferent, right? So efferent, remember afferent goes in towards the central nervous system. Efferent goes away towards an effector. Try and remember these things, right? To an effector. So that would be a motor. So this is coming out from the central nervous system. Okay. Therefore, it's motor impulse, and it's going to skeletal muscles. That's the somatic portion in that term. So general means not specialized. Somatic means it's going to muscles or glands, right? Efferent means it's going away from the central nervous system. So GSE is the first one. GVE, again, generalized, so not specialized there. Visceral, so it tells you it's going to the viscera. So this means I'm going to the glands, also smooth muscles. And again, efferent, so it's going away from the central nervous system. It's a motor nerve. General somatic, there's your muscles, skeletal muscles. Afferent now. So afferent tells you it's going in towards the central nervous system. So this is sensory. Sensory and afferent are always going to be together, right? So bringing stuff to the central nervous system, but we're coming from the things like the skeletal muscles, and don't forget the skin. General, again, not specialized. Visceral, so we're talking about the viscera, this case, blood vessels and internal organs. Afferent, so it's coming in from those things to the central nervous system. And then we're going to have special. Special has special functions, and really special is pretty much isolated to your head. So eyes, nose, mouth, ears, those are the special senses. So those are going to be the specialized types of senses in there, and then you've got to regulate those. So it's not just enough to be able to see, but I have to move my eyes, right? So you have those sorts of things in there. So special refers to one of those things, something in the face and head usually, right? Somatic tells you it's muscles, right? So the muscles right there. And then efferent tells you it's going away from the central nervous system. So it's a motor nerve. So this is a motor impulse that goes to those things that are used for chewing, swallowing, speaking, special senses, right? Speaking and facial expressions. So this is all coming out to your face and controlling a lot of those muscles in the face. Special visceral, afferent, right? So afferent tells you it's sensory. Going this way. All right. This is going to the brain from your special senses like olfactory, which is smell, and taste receptors. Special somatic afferent. So again, coming in, and actually it's coming in like right here. But these are sensory going to the brain from your special senses that are sight, hearing, and equilibrium. So we have a little bit different here. So special visceral afferent is olfactory and taste. Special somatic afferent is sight, hearing, and equilibrium. All right. Now we're going to move into our cranial nerves. You have 12 pairs of cranial nerves, and yes, you need to know them. You need to know them by name, by function, and by number. And you notice that it's Roman numerals. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Nicely for you, they are numbered in order. So it generally goes back this way, And then if you look at the spinal cord would actually be reaching towards you. So it kind of comes, instead of being two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional. So it kind of, this is all, it looks a little crazy in here, like these numbers get out of order in this range, but it's really because that spinal cord is really coming towards you, not flat down behind, okay? But we start with 1 and then we go that way. So there's a way to remember this, okay? You have to go back and you're going to have to know the names: olfactory, optic, oculomotor, but there's a mnemonic that goes with this. So if you go O, to touch and feel, very good, velvet. And your book says all heavenly. I just learned it as all with AH, but all heavenly gives you two words in that. And that way it gets you olfactory, optic, ocular, motor. You got to remember which 3 O's are in which place, but that tells you where the O's are. They're at the beginning, okay? And then you have trochlear and trigeminal. So again, you got to remember trochlear comes before trigeminal, all right? Then the abducens, facial, and you got over here behind me, vestibulocochlear and hypoglossal and those kinds of things. So we do have all of those going on in there. But so you've got a couple A's. You got to remember a couple V's, which one comes first, all right? And then the T's and the O's. To touch and feel, very good, velvet, all heavenly, all right? There it is right there. Go back and remember the names, but on a multiple choice test, that kind of gives you a little bit of a help, right? So the first thing I would do is to, remember to think about it. To touch it. So write it out or do it in your head so that you can remember it. Now you're also going to need to know whether the nerve is sensory, motor, or both. So remember that, and both is mixed, but I can't use the letter M because I have M for motor, so we're going to use both for being a mixed nerve. Now remember, for a spinal nerve, all of them are mixed except the first one. But for cranial nerves, that's not the case. You have sensory, you have motor, and then you have some mixed nerves that we're going to refer to as both. So there's a mnemonic to remember this too, and it goes in order for 1, 2, 3, 4. You remember all those? 9, 10, 11, and 12 right here. This goes in order too. Some say marry money, but my brother says bad business marrying money. So the first one here, this first O, is a sensory nerve, some. Second O is a sensory nerve, say. The third nerve right here is M for motor. M for motor, B for both. So you just go down. If you remember it, you can say, okay, some say Mary, do it on your fingers, like count it up, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and you go down and you can remember which one's which. If you can think of something better, go ahead and use it, but this is something to try and give you a little help. All right, here's the cranial nerves. Here's the spinal nerves coming off of here. This are the cranial nerves. So we start with the frontal lobe, and then we work back to the spinal cord back here, and you have nerves that come down. So we're going to start with number 1, and they're all in pairs, by the way. When I say number 1, there's actually 2 of each because they're in pairs. But the first one here and here is our optic. That's what we're going to start with, and then we're going to work through them in order. All right, first one, olfactory. Olfactory is for smell. Okay, this is a sensory nerve. Remember that some say marry money? Here's your sum. Okay, so first one, olfactory, this is for smell. There it is right there. You need to know them for the lab practical. You're going to need to know which ones are which, okay? So that's something to start getting to know. Second one, cranial nerve number 2 is optic. Optic is sight, so vision. And again, this is sensory. So some say there's your sensory. All right, so it's bringing in, basically when I say sensory, it's bringing in information for vision. It's not telling my eyes where to move. It's bringing in that information, the light waves. And so it's transmitting light waves I've received to my brain, which goes to the occipital lobe back here. That's the cerebellum right here, but back there, occipital lobe, so that I can figure out what that is that I see. So these are cut off, by the way. They're actually longer. They would go to the eyes themselves, but they show them cut off. So you have them, extending out to the eyes. So an eye would actually be attached to the end of each of these. Notice that it comes in and it crosses. This is something you're going to need to know in lab. So the optic nerve is this first part. So this is the optic nerve. And then when it crosses, that's called the optic chiasma. C-H-I-A-S-M-A, chiasma. And then the optic tract is when it comes back and it's extending back and it's heading towards that occipital lobe. All right, third one, oculomotor. Motor's in the term right there, so it tells you that this is a motor nerve. Some say Mary, so we're on that third one. That's motor. Oculomotor. Oculo refers to the eyes. So since this is a motor nerve, this is actually the nerve of many. There's several that do this, that help with movement of things that control the eyes. So all of the muscles around the eyes, including the eyelids, moving the eyes, also focusing your lens. I have to be able to put things into focus that I see. So that's little muscles that control that focusing of the lens. And that's information coming from this nerve. And then adjust how much light's coming in through the pupil. This is part of that too. Now, there is one thing I want to say. Even though I say it's motor, right? No nerve is completely motor, because remember, motor is saying I want to move a muscle. And if I want to move a muscle, I really need to know how much tension that muscle is right now and where in this case, where my eyes are. Are they looking to the side, up, down, or whatever? I need to have that information to me. So even though you have something that's a motor nerve, we're also going to have a little bit of sensory information coming in from every motor type of information that's going out. This is called proprioception. So we have these little sensory receptors called proprioceptors that are constantly monitoring how tense the muscles are, how much pressure is on those muscles and tendons, and sending that back to the brain so that that brain can then go in and make that correction or that movement that will regulate the movement, in this case of the eye. So every time you see motor, remember, even though I say it's motor, it's not entirely motor by itself. You will see that proprioception also going on in there. But we're not considering it strictly as sensory. So sensory, I'm saying information coming in from the outside that need to make changes. Proprioception is just like monitoring what's going on so that I can make a motor movement. All right, there's number 3. So we went from 1, 2, now we're on this one right here. This is the third, oculomotor. Cranial nerve number 4 is the trochlear. It's your first of your 2 T's. So remember those. It is right here, a little bit off. So this was 3. This is 4 right here. I'm going to take that off of there. You can see it right here. It's a little bitty wiry looking thing. So sometimes it goes unnoticed, but you can see it right here and here. All right, again, primarily motor, so there's a little bit of proprioception going on, but this is another one that controls the movement of the eyes. Think about how important your eyes are to you. They're a huge sense organ. So we have a lot of brain that is dedicated to it, but we also have a lot of nerves that are dedicated to it. So where I'm going to have nerves that run to all kinds of things in my body, I've got several specialized nerves that just go to my eyes. And this is the second one for that, for movement of the eyes. All right, there's the trochlear. Here's my second T, trigeminal, and it is also my first mixed. Trigeminal is a pretty large nerve. You can see it right here. It's called trigeminal because it branches into 3 branches. You can see this big, large swelling and then these 3 branches, and they call them the 3 sisters, but it's just tri for 3. It has 3 branches, and basically what those 3 branches do is they come in to your face like this. So it's coming down from the brain and it's coming to your forehead and branching more when it gets there, your maxilla and your mandible. So there's 3 divisions right there. The first one is the ophthalmic. So this is going to your eyes. That's that upper one. Okay, surface of the eyes, tear glands, scalp, forehead. It's coming all into that region in there. Your second one, and again, that should be, sorry, I should have color coded that. That's sensory. So that's a sensory. That's the sensory portion. Your second one is also sensory. That's going to that maxilla. So that's this portion right in here. Okay, so your upper portion, including your teeth area, mouth area. Okay, so upper teeth, upper gum, lip, palate, skin of the face. So it's feeding all in here. And then the third one, notice how much it branches, by the way. See, I'm showing it come in, but then it branches all through here. Same with the ophthalmic. They all branch. The third one is the mandibular. So that's that third branch. Here's the trigeminal. Here's your first two branches. Here's that third branch. That one is going to come down, and you can see that it goes to the tongue, but it also goes down to the mandible. It also has sensory, but this is where that mixed portion comes in. So it's got motor function too. So we've got sensory from the scalp, the skin of the jaw, lower teeth, lower gum, lower lip, but motor that tells those muscles in the mandible how to move in order for you to chew. Mastication is chewing. So mastication of food and the lower floor of the mouth so that we can move that jaw. Remember, the jaw is the only movable bone in your skull, so you have to have information going there. And that is part of the trigeminal, which is cranial nerve number 5. Cranial nerve number 6 for Roman numerals. If you put a number in front, so V is 5, and if you put a number in front, you're basically subtracting it. So IV is 4, but VI is 5 plus 1, so that's 6. Okay. Cranial nerve number 6 is the abducens. So this is your first of your A's. So get those straight too. And again, this one's primarily motor. A little bit of proprioception going on, but it's primarily motor. This one is another one that moves the eye. Now, how important your eyes are. You've got a lot of cranial nerves that are just dedicated to this. There it is right there. So here was trigeminal, right? Come in here with the 3 sisters, and then come back, and we're going back posterior to the brain, and another small one right here is where you have abducens. Cranial nerve number 7 is the facial nerve. Kind of explains where it goes in there. It is a mixed nerve, so it has sensory and it has motor functions. So sensory for taste, motor for facial expression, your tear glands, and your salivary glands that are going to secrete some saliva for you to digest food, begin the digestion of food. There it is right there. So we had this one. Now we're going. So now we started here when we came back to the spinal cord. Now we're working outwards a little bit. So it's this next to that. And then, oh, there it is. So facial, and notice how much it branches here, but it's not like that big trigeminal that had 3 main branches. It has just a lot of smaller branches in there, but it does feed a lot of the face. All right, cranial nerve number 8 is a long one, vestibulocochlear. Sometimes you will hear it called the auditory nerve, but that's really only describing part of its functions. Vestibulocochlear refers to 2 things. The vestibular part, when we talk about it in the next chapter, this is part of your equilibrium. So the part of the ear that is in control of equilibrium, okay? And then the cochlear is for hearing. So that's the part of the ear that's for hearing. The cochlea does that. So it really does, it serves both of those regions of the ear. So acoustic for sound, auditory nerve here. So it's mainly a sensory nerve, and that equilibrium portion too. Okay, there it is right there. Again, 2 branches, vestibular, equilibrium, cochlear, hearing. Number, this X is a 10, okay? So 10 minus 1, with the 1 in front, this is number 9. So glossopharyngeal nerve. So you can see pharynx in that word right there. So glossopharyngeal is a mixed nerve. So it's got sensory from the pharynx, You also have the tonsils, the tongues, and the carotid arteries coming up your neck that are being monitored by this nerve. And then motor to the salivary gland, so release some saliva, also the muscles of the pharynx. By the way, the glosso portion, if you see that, a lot of times that's referring to tongue. Okay. All right, vagus nerve. This is number 10. Vagus nerve is your longest one, and this one is the one that extends. I told you some of them extend down to your thoracic and abdominal cavity. That's the vagus nerve. It's the longest of the cranial nerves. It doesn't just serve the face and the neck. This one's actually going way down into your body cavities. Notice everything that it's in charge of. I mean, it's got all of your intestines, stomach, liver, lungs, heart. It's serving all of that portion of the thoracic and abdominal cavities in there. It is also a mixed nerve, so it's got motor to speech, swallowing, but it's also going to go down into that lower portion in there. So we have the motor for the viscera in those two areas I talked about, thorax and abdomen. And then sensory coming in from the pharynx back here. The larynx, which is your voice box, that is not larynx, by the way. Look at the word. If you learned larynx, reteach yourself. That's larynx, the R before the Y. Larynx. Your esophagus, which is the food, so it's behind the larynx in there. And then also the viscera of your thoracic cavity and your abdominal cavity. All right, there it is right there. More on 10. Vagus, longest nerve. Well, next to last one is cranial nerve number 11. That's your other A. This one's called the accessory nerve. I always find the accessory nerve to be kind of easy to, some of these, either you got a whole bunch in here that get a little bit tricky on trying to figure them out. But the accessory nerve comes down. See the medulla oblongata coming down here? Look at the accessory. It's this nerve that runs parallel to the medulla oblongata and reaching into the spinal cord. And it has these little spider webby attachments that go to it. So it runs like here. So it's actually kind of pretty when you see it, but it makes it very obvious to see. This is, again, primarily a motor nerve, so there's a little bit of proprioception obviously going on in there. It kind of works the soft palate, so deep into the mouth. When you go in the mouth, right behind the teeth, that's the hard palate. You go back further, that's the soft palate back in there. And then the pharynx and the larynx, also part of that. And then the spinal branch of it's going to go into the neck and back and do those muscles back in there. Pick up information from those. Send information to those. All right. Last of the cranial nerves. Cranial nerve number 12 is the hypoglossal nerve. Okay, so remember I said glossal, tongue. So this one's motor for the tongue. Again, there's proprioception, but it's mostly motor in there. And then I gave you a little summary of all of those nerves. So you can come back and look at them all together. Looks a little fuzzy to me, but it's there. And that'll be it for this round of notes. See you on the next round.